The rain had begun softly, just a drizzle at first, the kind that you think will stop after a few minutes. But soon it became heavier, soaking the streets and washing away the color from everything. Emily stood beneath the awning of her husband's office building, holding a broken umbrella that flapped helplessly in the wind. She checked her phone again, no new message. Her husband Mark was supposed to pick her up. He had promised that morning, like he always did, that he'd be done early this time. Yet his text had arrived only minutes ago. Sorry, meeting ran late. Can you grab a ride? Emily sighed. It was always the same. She was used to waiting for rides, for dinners, for conversations that never seemed to happen anymore. She loved her husband, but his world was consumed by work. Endless meetings and calls that lasted until midnight. She couldn't remember the last time they had sat together just talking. It's the way they used to. She clutched her bag, considering whether to call a cab. When a familiar black sedan pulled up to the curb, the window rolled down smoothly and a calm voice spoke through the rain. Emily, you'll get drenched out here. Can I give you a ride? It was David Collins, Mark's boss. She blinked in surprise. He was not someone she saw often outside of formal events. David was in his late 40s, tall, always perfectly put together, with a way of speaking that made people listen. He wasn't intimidating, but he carried quiet authority. David. Oh, I know, I don't want to trouble you, Emily said politely, unsure how to respond. It's no trouble at all, he replied with a small, reassuring smile. Hop in before you catch a cold. After a brief hesitation, she opened the door and got in. The car smelled faintly of leather and rain, with a trace of cologne that seemed familiar but distant. The seats were warm, the atmosphere calm, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. Thank you, she said softly as she fastened her seatbelt. Of course, he said. Mark mentioned you were nearby today. I didn't expect to see you out in this weather. She smiled faintly. Neither did I. He was supposed to pick me up, but things came up. David nodded knowingly. That sounds like him, dedicated to a fault. There was a pause. The rain pattered against the windshield in a steady rhythm, filling the silence that stretched between them. It wasn't awkward, just quiet. The kind of silence that made you notice things you normally wouldn't. The hum of the engine, the faint rustle of his sleeve as he turned the wheel. The way his gaze stayed steady on the road. After a few moments, David spoke again. You've been to quite a few company dinners, haven't you? I always see you sitting near the corner, smiling politely. You remind me of someone I used to know, a good listener. Emily laughed softly. I guess I've had practice. Mark talks a lot about work, even at home. David smiled, but didn't say anything right away. He's lucky, he said finally. It's rare to have someone patient enough to listen. Emily glanced at him curiously. You sound like you've thought about that before. I have, he admitted. When I was younger, I thought the secret to success was giving everything to your career. But it cost me things I didn't realize mattered until much later. His tone softened as he said it, and for a second, Emily saw something behind his calm expression, a quiet sadness, maybe even regret. She wanted to ask what he meant, but he looked back at the road quickly, though steering away from the thought itself. The city lights blurred through the rain, streaks of gold and red gliding past. Emily found herself looking at David, really looking at him. There was something about his presence, calm, confident, but with a gentleness she hadn't noticed before. She could see why people respected him. He didn't demand attention. He simply drew it. Then he spoke again, his voice low. You know, people like you. Emily, the one standing quietly beside someone who's always running forward, you carry more than people realize. You make their lives stable. You give them the peace to keep going. She blinked. His words caught her completely off guard. It was such a simple observation. Yet it reached her in a place she didn't even know was empty. I never thought about it that way, she murmured. That's because you're the kind who doesn't need to, he replied gently. You just do it. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be noticed. Emily looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't new, but this was different. It wasn't flattery, it felt like understanding. And maybe that was what made it powerful. As they drove, the rain began to fall harder again, drumming against the car roof like a steady heartbeat. The city outside was fading into evening, and the roads were slick and dark. Emily gave directions toward her neighborhood, but just as she was about to tell him to take the next right, David slowed at the intersection and turned left instead. She frowned slightly. "Oh, I think you missed the turn." "I know," he said, glancing at her with a small smile. "This way's a bit longer, but it avoids the flooded road ahead." She nodded, accepting the explanation, but something about his tone caught her attention. It wasn't casual. There was intention in it. Quiet, but certain. As they passed the downtown lights and entered a quieter part of town, the mood inside the car shifted. Not uncomfortably, just deeper. Like the air itself carried more weight. After a few moments, David spoke again, his voice softer now. "You remind me of my wife," he said quietly. Emily turned slightly toward him. "Your wife?" He nodded. "She was like you've always patient, always thinking of everyone else first. I used to think that made her happy. I was wrong. I didn't realize how lonely she was until it was too late." The honesty in his voice made Emily's heart ache. She could hear the pain beneath the calm words. It's a kind of sorrow that never fully healed. "I'm sorry," she said gently. David smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's all right. Life teaches you things the hard way sometimes. I just hope Mark doesn't make the same mistake I did." Car went quiet again, but not with silence. There was emotion in it, unspoken but heavy. Emily looked out the window, watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass. She wanted to say something to defend Mark, to explain that he wasn't cold, just busy. But she couldn't find the words, because deep down she knew David was right. Her husband was kind, generous, ambitious, but somewhere along the line, the warmth between them had faded into routine. Conversations had turned into quick exchanges. Dinner had become something eaten in front of a screen. And Emily had accepted it quietly, convincing herself that this was what love looked like after years of marriage. David turned slightly, his eyes soft but searching. "Emily, do you ever feel like you've disappeared a little?" The question startled her. It was too direct, too close to something she'd never said aloud. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He didn't press her. He simply nodded, as if he already knew the answer. "That's how it starts," he said quietly. "You stop being seen. And one day, you forget what it felt like to be noticed." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. His words were calm, but they reached somewhere deep, like a mirror reflecting her own unspoken truth. She turned to the window again, blinking quickly, trying to steady herself. "It's just been a long week," she said softly. "I'm sure it has," he said kindly. "You don't have to explain." They drove the rest of the way in silence. The rain softened, and soon they were approaching her neighborhood. Emily didn't know how to feel, grateful, confused, or moved. It had been such a simple car ride, yet it felt like something important had shifted. When David finally pulled up outside her home, she unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to him. "Thank you for the ride, and for listening." He smiled gently. "Anytime, Emily. Take care of yourself." As she stepped out, the rain had slowed to a mist. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. She watched his car disappear down the street, its taillights fading into the distance, and for a long time, just stood there under the quiet night sky. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even temptation. It was something simpler but deeper. Someone had seen her, really seen her, after years of feeling invisible. And that realization left her both comforted and unsettled, as if something within her had been quietly awakened. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of rain again. It had rained all night, the kind of endless drizzle that seeps into everything: streets, windows, even your thoughts. She lay in bed for a while, listening to it tap against the glass. Mark had already left for work. She could tell from the silence. His side of the bed was cold. She got up slowly, made coffee, and stood by the window as the steam rose in the morning light. Her mind drifted back to last night, the car ride with David. She didn't mean to think about it. But the memory lingered like a song that wouldn't fade. His calm voice, his quiet understanding. The way he had looked at her, not with admiration or flirtation, but recognition. It wasn't wrong, she told herself. It was just a conversation. But something about it had unsettled her deeply. It wasn't David himself, it was what he'd made her realize. She missed being seen. She missed being heard. When Mark came home that evening, she tried to start a conversation. She asked about his day, his meeting, the project he'd been working on. He answered briefly, distracted, scrolling through emails on his phone. "It went fine," he said. "Just another long day." Emily smiled faintly. "You're working too hard, you know." He nodded absently. "I'll catch up on rest this weekend." But she knew he wouldn't. There was always another email, another client, another urgent thing that couldn't wait. She watched him for a long moment and realized something quietly painful. He wasn't cruel or careless. He just didn't see what she saw anymore. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept turning the conversation over in her head. David's words, his tone, his honesty. She hadn't met anyone who spoke like that in a long time. It wasn't romantic, but it stirred something in her raw need to feel noticed, to be part of something that felt real. The next day, she went to the grocery store. It was a small-town market, warm and familiar. She liked the rhythm of shopping alone, the smell of coffee near the bakery aisle, the quiet hum of other people going about their lives. She was walking toward the checkout when she heard a voice behind her. "Emily." She turned. David stood there, holding a small basket, rain droplets on his coat. He smiled, surprised. "I was just grabbing a few things." Seems like we both had the same idea. Emily's heart skipped slightly. "Small town, I guess," she said with a laugh. "Or good timing," he replied. "You look better today. Less tired." She smiled politely, though she knew what he meant. She had looked tired the night before, tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. "Maybe it's the coffee," she said, lifting the cup in her hand. "Or maybe," he said softly, "it's because you finally talked to someone who listened." The words caught her off guard again. He said them so naturally, not as a compliment, but as a simple truth. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her cart, unsure what to say. He changed the subject quickly, easing the weight of the moment. "Mark mentioned you paint, didn't he?" "I used to," she said. "Not much anymore. Life gets busy." "Just start again," he said. "You have that calm energy about you. The kind that belongs in art." She laughed softly. "You make it sound so poetic." "Not poetry," he said. "It's observation." They walked to the register together, talking easily. It was strange. She had known David for years through Mark, yet she'd never really talked to him. He wasn't the man she'd imagined from company dinners. He wasn't distant or formal. He was thoughtful, kind, the sort of man who paid attention to the world around him. When they stepped outside, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. David looked toward his car, then back at her. "Need a lift home again?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated for a moment. She knew it might look strange, her husband's boss giving her another ride. But there was nothing inappropriate about it. He was being kind. That was all, sure, she said. "If it's not out of your way?" "It never is," he said simply. The drive this time was quieter, more comfortable. They didn't need to fill the silence with small talk. At one point, a song came on the radio, something slow and soft from the 80s. Emily smiled faintly. "I used to love this song," she said. David glanced at her, smiling. "You have good taste." They both listened for a moment. The lyrics were about time, how quickly it moves, how easily things change. Emily looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She wondered when she'd last listened to music with someone as they neared her house. David slowed the car. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course," she replied. "Are you happy, Emily?" The question landed softly but deeply. She turned to look at him, startled. "That's a complicated question," she said after a moment. He nodded. Most honest ones are. Just thought about it. I love my husband, she said carefully. He's a good man. We've built a life together. But sometimes I feel like we're living side by side, not together. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, he said quietly. That's how most people lose each other slowly, quietly, without realizing it. She looked down at her hands. Maybe that's just what marriage becomes after a while. Only if you let it, he said. But sometimes you just need someone to remind you that you're still there, that you still matter. His words made her heart tighten. She wanted to say something to change the subject. But the air inside the car felt thick with emotion and spoken, but heavy. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was Mark. She glanced at the screen. The message was short. Working late again. Don't wait for dinner. David saw the look on her face. Another late night. She nodded silently. Yes, he didn't say anything, but his expression softened with understanding. Then promise me one thing, he said finally. Don't disappear into the waiting. You deserve more than that. Emily blinked back the sudden emotion in her eyes. She didn't know why his words affected her so much. It wasn't the meaning alone, but the sincerity behind them. When they reached her house, she turned to him. Thank you, David, for the ride. For everything. He smiled gently. Any time, Emily, and for the record, you don't have to thank me. Sometimes people just need to be seen. She stepped out of the car, holding the groceries close, watching as he drove away. The evening sky had turned pale gray, and the rain had stopped completely. She stood there for a long moment, feeling both grateful and confused. Inside, the house was silent. She set the groceries down and sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought. It wasn't about David, it wasn't about anyone else, really. It was about her, about realizing how much of herself she had quietly set aside over the years. That night, she took out her old sketchbook. The pages were yellowed, the pencil marks faded, but as she flipped through them, she felt a small spark of something she hadn't felt in years. She sharpened a pencil, sat by the window, and began to draw. Her hand trembled at first, but slowly the lines took shape of figure in the rain, standing beneath an umbrella. She wasn't sure if it was her or someone she once wanted to be, but as she drew, she felt alive again. Hours passed. The rain stopped completely. When she looked up, dawn had begun to lighten the horizon. She smiled faintly, realizing she hadn't thought about time all night. The next morning, Art noticed the sketchbook on the table. "You're drawing again?" he asked, surprised. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. He nodded absently, scrolling through his phone again. "Looks good," he said without looking closely. Emily smiled to herself. It was fine. She didn't need him to notice, not right now. For the first time in years, she had noticed herself. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from David, just checking in. "Hope the rain didn't keep you up all night." She looked at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "No, it helped me start something again." There was a pause before he replied. "Good. Don't stop this time." Emily smiled, a quiet warmth filling her chest. She didn't know what the future held or where any of this would lead. But she knew one thing for sure, something had changed inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, understood. Alive.n, though she didn't realize it yet, that small, unexpected connection would soon lead to a moment that would change everything between them. The kind of moment that starts softly like rain and stays with you forever. The days after that quiet text exchange passed in a blur of thoughts Emily couldn't quite shake. The weather finally cleared, leaving behind bright skies and crisp air that hinted at early spring. Yet inside her there was still a storm, not the kind that brought rain, but the kind that stirred feelings long kept silent. Mark was busier than ever. His company had landed a new client. And dinner conversations turned into updates about contracts, deadlines, and office politics. Emily listened politely, but she could feel the growing distance between them, not anger, not bitterness, but a quiet emptiness, like two people living parallel lives in the same space. Their paths rarely crossed in the way they once did. One evening, as she set the table, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "I'm hosting a small dinner for the team Friday night. Mark said he might not make it. You're welcome to come if you'd like." She hesitated. It wasn't unusual for David to include spouses at work gatherings. But something about the way he phrased it felt personal, thoughtful. After a moment, she replied, "I'll think about it." Friday arrived quickly. Mark left early that morning, leaving only a note saying he might be stuck late again. Emily looked at the clock that evening, her heart weighing the decision. Stay home and spend another quiet night, or go and be part of something, even just for a few hours. By the time she stepped out the door, the sun was setting. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pale pink clouds. She wore a soft blue dress, simple, not fancy, and tied her short hair back neatly. When she arrived, David's house was warmly lit. Laughter spilling through the open door. Inside, the mood was easy and welcoming. A few of Mark's coworkers were there, chatting around the living room. David greeted her near the entryway, his smile calm and genuine. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But it's a lovely evening for company." "I'm glad you did," he replied. As the night went on, Emily found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. The conversation wasn't about deadlines or clients. It was about life, memories, and small things that made people human. David had a way of making everyone feel at ease. When the last guest left, she realized how late it had gotten. "I should get going," she said, standing near the door. "I'll walk you to your car," he offered. Outside, the night was cool and still. Street lights cast a soft glow over the driveway. Emily paused before getting in. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "It was nice to feel part of something again." David smiled, his eyes kind. "You are part of something, Emily. You just forget that sometimes." She looked at him for a long moment, unsure what to say. "You say things like that so easily," she said quietly. "Like you already know what I'm thinking." He shrugged lightly. "Maybe I just pay attention. Most people don't." Her heart tightened at that. For years, she had lived quietly, fulfilling roles: wife, homemaker, partner. But somewhere in between, she had faded into the background. Hearing someone acknowledge that was both comforting and painful. They stood in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Do you ever wonder when life became about waiting?" She blinked. "Waiting for what?" "For moments that never come. For people to notice. For something to change." She didn't answer because she knew exactly what he meant. David took a slow breath. "You don't have to wait anymore, Emily. You just have to choose to live again. Do something that's yours." The words hit her deeply, not as advice, but as truth. She nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." When she got home that night, the house was dark. Mark wasn't back yet. She sat by the window for a while, looking out at the quiet street. There was no guilt in her heart, only clarity. David hadn't crossed any line. He had simply reminded her of something she had forgotten, that she was still alive, still capable of feeling joy, of rediscovering herself. The next morning, she found Mark asleep on the couch, his laptop open beside him. She covered him with a blanket, her heart heavy but not angry. She wasn't upset with him, just sad for both of them. They had built a life together, but somewhere along the way, they'd stopped truly seeing each other. Over the following weeks, Emily started painting again. It began with small sketches, then full canvases. She'd lose hours mixing colors, chasing the right light across her brushstrokes. It gave her a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. One afternoon, David texted her again. "I walked past the art shop today. Thought of you." "Still painting?" "Every day," she replied. "Good, don't stop." That simple exchange filled her with warmth. It wasn't romantic, but it was meaningful to people understanding each other in ways words couldn't fully explain. A few days later, Mark noticed the paintings stacked against the wall. "You've been busy," he said. She smiled. "It makes me happy." He nodded, distracted. "That's good. I'm glad you found something to do." Wasn't dismissive, just unaware. And that was when Emily truly understood the difference between being loved and being known. Weeks passed. Spring arrived fully. Flowers began to bloom in the yard. One afternoon, David stopped by unexpectedly. He was returning a folder Mark had left at the office, but Mark wasn't home. When Emily opened the door, David smiled politely. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced. I thought Mark might need this." "It's not here," she said, "but I can give it to him." He hesitated for a moment. "You've been painting," he said, noticing the canvases leaning against the wall. She nodded. "It feels strange and good at the same time. Can I see?" She hesitated, then gestured for him to come in. He stepped closer, studying the paintings with quiet admiration. "These are beautiful," he said sincerely. "You have something special, Emily?" She looked at the floor. "It's just a hobby." "No," he said gently. "It's who you are." There was silence between them, not awkward, just full. She could feel the emotion in the air, a kind of understanding that didn't need words. He turned to her then, his voice softer. "You know, sometimes people meet at the right time for the wrong reasons, and sometimes they meet at the wrong time for the right ones." She understood what he meant instantly. Her heart ached, not from confusion, but from the bittersweet truth in his words. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but it's helped me remember who I am." He nodded. "Then it's already worth something." Before leaving, he looked at her one last time and said, "Don't lose what you've found, Emily, not even if it means walking alone for a while." After he left, she sat on the couch for a long time, staring at her paintings. His words echoed in her mind. Don't lose what you found that night. When Mark came home, she didn't feel angry or resentful. She simply knew that something had changed, not between her and David, but within herself. She realized she didn't need validation to exist, didn't need attention to feel alive. What she needed was purpose. Over the next few months, she began selling her artwork at a small gallery downtown. The first time she saw one of her paintings on display, she cried quietly, not because of pride, but because it felt like coming home to herself. Mark eventually noticed the change too. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, he said softly, "You seem different lately." "I think I just started remembering who I am," she said with a faint smile. He looked at her thoughtfully, perhaps realizing how far apart they had drifted. "I've missed that version of you," he said quietly. Emily smiled kindly. She was always here, just waiting to be seen. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the quiet tension between them. There was no dramatic ending, no confrontation, no forbidden romance. Just two people learning to understand themselves again and maybe in time each other. As for David, they remained friends. Occasionally, he'd text her about a new art exhibit or simply to check in. There was respect, gratitude, and something unspoken. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful connections are not those that break rules, but those that heal wounds you didn't know you had. And on quiet nights, when the rain returned and the house grew still, Emily would sit by her window, sketchbook in hand, and think about how a single unexpected moment, a car ride, a conversation, a kind word had changed the way she saw herself forever. Because sometimes the most surprising turns in life don't come from what others do to you, but from what they help you see inside yourself.